Hey guys, tonight we're heading back in time, to an era of muddy streets, smoky hearths, and a baffling lack of Wi-Fi. We're going to explore all the wonderfully weird, often dangerous, and truly bizarre things people did for fun back in the Middle Ages. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture yourself standing on a dusty, cobbled street in the year 1350. The air is thick with the smells of baking bread and something you probably don't want to know the origin of. A pig scampers past your legs. You hear a blacksmith's hammer ringing out. And in the distance, a group of people are cheering, not for a game, not for a concert, but for a public shaming. This is a world where entertainment and survival were often mixed up in ways we can barely comprehend today. And you, my friend, probably wouldn't last 5 minutes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're just settling in, tell me where you were and what time it is for you in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on the edge of a great field, the ground churned into a muddy mess by countless feet and hooves. The air buzzes with an electric energy, a mix of anticipation and a low, guttural fear. In the distance, you see two figures, sheathed in steel, astride massive warhorses. They are about to engage in a tournament. Now, when you hear the word tournament, your mind probably goes to the polished, scripted events you see in movies. A bit of theatrical fun. In reality, a medieval tournament was a violent, chaotic affair, and you might get trampled just standing on the sidelines. These weren't friendly games. The goal was to prove your prowess, your strength, and your worth as a knight, and that often meant causing some serious bodily harm. The most common event was the melee, a large-scale mock battle where teams of knights would clash, often with blunt swords and lances. It was less a sport and more a controlled riot, a way for young, ambitious knights to show off and, more importantly, to capture other knights for ransom. A successful day could make a knight's fortune. A bad one, well, a bad one could get you seriously, permanently, out of the game. The danger was not just from the fighting itself but from the very spectacle. A famous historical fact is that King Henry II of France was killed in a jousting tournament in 1559. A splinter from a shattered lance went through his eye. A gruesome but surprisingly common-ish end for a man playing a supposedly noble sport. But it wasn't just jousting. Another weird tidbit about tournaments is that sometimes they'd include events like the grand melee on horseback with spiked maces, or a foot combat where you had to fight other knights on a narrow bridge over water. The goal was to knock your opponent off, often into the icy drink below. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of these tournaments was military training or pure entertainment. Was it a necessity to keep fighting skills sharp? Or was it simply a way for the nobility to show off and gamble on the outcome? The truth, of course, is probably somewhere in the middle. You stand there, watching the dust kick up, the clang of steel on steel echoing across the field, a reminder that for the rich and powerful, even fun was a deadly serious business. As the roar of the tournament fades into a distant hum, you find yourself wandering away from the muddy fields and back toward the heart of the village. The narrow, twisting alleys are a maze of half-timbered houses and straw-strewn streets. The air is still thick with the smells of the day, but now you pick up something new, the scent of wood smoke, old ale, and a faint, sweet smell of something baking. You hear a new sound, too, a cacophony of laughter, shouts, and a single, shrill whistle. You turn a corner and suddenly you're in a small, crowded square, where a makeshift stage has been erected from a few rickety wooden planks and an old cart. This, you realize, is the village theater. But forget everything you know about quiet theaters with velvet seats and hushed audiences. This is medieval street theater, and it's a completely different animal. The actors, who are usually just a group of traveling players or even local villagers, are performing a play called a morality play. These were allegorical dramas where the characters weren't people, but concepts, good deeds, knowledge, death, and everyman. The plot was usually a simple tale of temptation, sin, and redemption. It was a very popular form of entertainment, and also a way for the church to teach important moral lessons to a largely illiterate population. But, of course, this being the Middle Ages, they also had plenty of fun with it. A funny little tidbit you notice is that the devil, in these plays, was often the funniest and most popular character. A bit of a slapstick buffoon who would jump around and mock the other actors. It was a kind of release valve, a way to laugh at the very things they feared. But the real entertainment, the kind that drew the biggest crowds, was something a bit less subtle. These were the mystery plays, which depicted scenes from the Bible. The twist? They were often performed on massive, multi-level pageant wagons that would roll through the streets, stopping at various points so the whole town could watch. It was a bit like a medieval parade and live-action movie rolled into one. Another quirky thing you might see is a performance of a farce, which was a short, body, and often satirical play filled with jokes about cheating spouses, bumbling priests, and corrupt officials. You stand there, a little uncomfortable but captivated, as the actors, with their exaggerated gestures and loud voices, draw you into their world. The crowd is a mix of peasants and craftsmen, all of them roaring with laughter at a joke so crude you're glad you don't have to repeat it. Historians still argue whether these plays were a genuinely spiritual experience or just an excuse for a party. On the one hand, they were sponsored by the church and civic guilds and were meant to reinforce religious teachings. On the other hand, they were also a giant public spectacle, a day of celebration, feasting, and general revelry. The line between religious devotion and pure entertainment was blurry. And you can see that clearly as you watch a character representing lust stumble around comically, getting chased by a man in a pitchfork costume. You can almost hear a modern-day producer pitching it. It's biblical, but with more slapstick. The noise is deafening, the jokes are a bit too much, and the whole thing is beautifully, messily, and utterly human. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, people needed to laugh, and they were willing to do almost anything for it. You duck out of the raucous square, the sound of the farcical play fading behind you, and find yourself on a quieter, but no less interesting, street. The setting sun casts long, deep shadows, and you can feel the chill of the evening settling in. As you walk, you peer into the window of a tavern, its interior lit by the flickering glow of a single tallow candle. Inside, the scene is quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos you just left. Men with beards and calloused hands are hunched over a small table, their heads bowed in concentration. You lean in closer, and you see what they're doing. They're playing a game. This isn't a game of cards, which were becoming more popular at the time but were still often considered a bit scandalous. This is a game of strategy, a mental battle played out on a wooden board. It's chess, for the nobility and the learned classes. Board games were a highly respected form of entertainment, a way to sharpen the mind and show off your strategic prowess without the risk of getting a lance splintered into your eye. Chess, in particular, was a favorite, having been introduced to Europe from the Islamic world around the 10th century. A fun historical fact is that the pieces we know today didn't always look the same. The queen piece, for example, was originally a vizier, and was much weaker. It was only during the late medieval period that she was transformed into the powerful, wide-ranging piece we know today. Historians still argue whether this change was a reflection of the growing power of influential queens like Isabella of Castile or simply a practical change to make the game more dynamic. But it wasn't just chess. You see other boards around the tavern. There's backgammon, with its click-clack of dice and its simple, yet addictive, gameplay. And then there's a game you've never seen before, called Taffel or King's Table. A Nordic game that involved a king and a small group of defenders trying to escape a larger force of attackers. It was a game of asymmetry, with different goals for each side, and you can imagine how many heated arguments it would start. The boards for these games were often beautifully carved from wood or even bone, and you can sense the value they hold. They're not just toys, they're symbols of status and intelligence. A slightly quirky tidbit about these games is that they were often a part of courtship. A gentleman might invite a lady to play a game of chess, not just to pass the time, but to subtly gauge her intelligence and wit. Imagine the pressure of that first date. You're not just trying to make a good impression, you're trying to win. And you're trying not to look like a complete buffoon in front of the person you're interested in. The room is quiet save for the low murmur of conversation and the soft thunk of a chess piece being moved. It's a peaceful, intellectual contrast to the violent games and the body plays you've encountered earlier. It's a reminder that medieval life wasn't all mud and mayhem. Sometimes, it was just two people, sitting across from each other, quietly trying to outsmart one another. A little bit like your last online dating profile, but with way less swiping. Leaving the quiet contemplation of the tavern behind, you step back out into the night. The moon hangs like a pale coin in the sky, and the air is crisp and cool. The village is settling down for the night, but a different kind of energy seems to be stirring on the outskirts. You hear the baying of dogs in the distance, a deep, resonant sound that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. A flicker of torchlight dances on the horizon, a fiery trail moving toward the forest. You decide to follow. This is the hunt, but not the kind you're used to seeing on nature shows. This is a medieval royal hunt, and it is a deadly serious affair, a prime form of entertainment for the elite. As you draw closer, you see a retinue of noblemen on horseback, dressed in fine tunics and carrying powerful bows and spears. They are accompanied by a pack of large, muscular hounds, their noses to the ground, pulling their handlers along with an urgent determination. The quarry tonight is likely a wild boar, a notoriously dangerous and ferocious animal that could easily turn on its pursuers. A well-known historical fact is that hunting was not just a sport, it was a way for the nobility to demonstrate their physical prowess and courage. And it was also a way for them to reinforce their social dominance. The forest and all its game were the exclusive domain of the aristocracy. Peasants caught poaching could face severe punishments, including having their hands cut off or even being executed. The game laws were a brutal and effective way to maintain power. There's a quirky tidbit about boar hunting that you learn as you watch. The dogs, known as boarhounds, weren't just for tracking. Once they cornered the boar, their job was to distract it, to hold its attention so the hunter could get close enough to deliver the final killing blow with a spear or a sword. This was a moment of immense danger. The boar, with its sharp tusks, could disembowel a man or a dog in a single, lightning-fast strike. So, you can imagine the mixture of exhilaration and sheer terror that the hunters must have felt. It was a high-stakes game of courage and skill, where a single misstep could mean a horrible death. And, it seems, they loved the thrill of it. But it wasn't just boar. The nobility also hunted deer, rabbits, and all manner of fowl. Hawking, or falconry, was another highly regarded form of hunting and a symbol of status. You see a man on the edge of the hunting party with a hooded bird on his arm. A majestic falcon. This was a quiet, more subtle art, but no less serious. The practice of falconry was so ingrained in noble life that manuals were written about it. And the type of bird you owned was a direct reflection of your rank in society. Historians still argue whether the thrill of the hunt came from the kill itself or from the elaborate ritual and the display of power that surrounded it. Was it about the sport? Or about the social performance? It's a bit like a modern-day professional golfer, right? They're playing a game, sure, but they're also part of a larger performance of wealth and skill. The hunt was the ultimate form of both. A brutal, beautiful ballet of predator and prey. The sounds of the hunt fade behind you as the noblemen's torches become tiny, distant pinpricks of light. You're alone on a dusty, moonlit road, and a sudden shiver runs down your spine. But it's not from fear. It's from a quiet sense of possibility. You realize that this road, this simple, ancient path, can lead you somewhere else. In the Middle Ages, one of the most common and compelling reasons to leave your home was to go on a pilgrimage. And it was much more than a spiritual journey, it was an epic road trip, a grand adventure, and a bizarrely popular form of entertainment. A mainstream historical fact is that millions of people went on pilgrimages during the medieval period. They weren't just the devout. People from all walks of life, from peasants to princes, would set out for distant holy sites. They would walk for weeks or even months, enduring hardship, sickness, and the dangers of the road to reach places like the tomb of St. James at Santiago de Compostela in Spain, the holy sites in Rome, or even Jerusalem. The journey itself was considered part of the penance, and the hardships you endured were thought to count toward the forgiveness of your sins. It was, in a way, the ultimate spiritual workout. But here's a quirky tidbit. Many people went on pilgrimages not just for spiritual reasons, but for the fun of it. It was a chance to escape the drudgery of village life, to see new places, to meet new people, and to hear new stories. It was a kind of proto-tourism. Pilgrims would travel in groups for safety, and these groups often became social units. A kind of medieval caravan. You would share food, tell jokes, sing songs, and help each other out along the way. Think of it like a long, winding camping trip with a bunch of strangers. Only at the end you get to see some very old relics. They would stop at churches along the way, where they would be able to buy souvenirs. Things like religious badges made of lead that they would pin to their hats to show off all the places they had visited. It was the medieval equivalent of a passport full of stamps and a backpack covered in travel patches. The journey was full of unique sights and sounds. You might pass through villages you'd never heard of, see different kinds of architecture, and hear people speaking in dialects so strange you could barely understand them. You might even encounter a traveling group of performers or a fair along the way. This was a chance to see the world beyond your tiny hamlet. A world that was vast and full of wonder. But it was also dangerous. The roads were rife with bandits, and the journey was physically exhausting. You could easily fall ill or get lost. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for these journeys was religious piety or a desire for adventure. The line, as with so many things in the Middle Ages, was blurry. Was the pilgrimage an act of faith or an act of defiance against a boring life? You walk along, the dust of the road crunching under your feet, and you can feel the pull of the open road, the promise of something new. The open road is behind you now, and you find yourself back in a bustling town square. The sun is high in the sky, and a large crowd has gathered in a tight circle. A single figure stands on a makeshift wooden platform in the center. The air is tense, but not with fear, and you realize something strange. The mood isn't somber or reverent, it's excited. People are laughing, chattering, and selling meat pies and ale from carts on the side. You realize, attending a public execution. This is a chilling but undeniably popular form of entertainment in the Middle Ages. A shocking but true historical fact is that public executions, along with public punishments like being placed in the stocks or pillory, were major public events. They were a kind of civic spectacle, a combination of justice and theater. The people weren't there just to witness a punishment, they were there to be part of an event. To see a dramatic display of power and morality. The condemned person was often paraded through the streets beforehand, and the entire process was a public ritual designed to serve as a warning to others. But for the average person, it was also a morbid and captivating day out. You can see families gathered together, pointing and gossiping, as if they were at a festival. A quirky tidbit is that the crowd would sometimes throw things at the condemned. Not just to show contempt but as a way to participate in the act of justice. Rotten vegetables, mud, and even stones were common projectiles. Yet, at other times, a sympathetic crowd might try to offer the condemned a last drink or a kind word. The reaction was often a strange mix of condemnation and pity. The executioner, or master of death, was a very well-known and often feared figure in the community, and his skill was a point of public discussion. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of these public spectacles was to truly deter crime or to simply reaffirm the power of the ruling class. Was it an act of justice? Or an act of control? It seems to have been both. It was a brutal form of social control disguised as a communal event. You watch as the crowd shifts and murmurs. A collective gasp followed by a low chatter. This, you realize, is the main event. It is a spectacle of finality. And for a society without mass media, it was a powerful reminder of the rules. The entire scene is unsettling and deeply strange. The casualness with which people are treating such a grave event. The way a small child stands on his father's shoulders to get a better view. The vendor hawking his wares a few feet away. It's all a strange, disquieting display of humanity. This wasn't just a punishment, it was a party. And you, for a moment, are a part of it, too. You turn away from the unsettling spectacle of the public execution. The cheers and murmurs of the crowd, a low drone behind you. The air now carries the tantalizing scent of roasting meat and spices. And your stomach gives a low rumble of protest. You follow the aroma, which leads you to a large, open courtyard near a lord's manor house. The courtyard is a hive of activity, lit by torches and packed with people. Long tables groan under the weight of platters piled high with food. This, you realize, is a medieval feast, and it's less a dinner party and more a sensory overload. A well-known historical fact is that a feast was a display of wealth, power, and social status. It was a chance for a lord to show off his generosity and his access to rare and exotic foods. Feasts were held for a number of occasions, religious holidays, weddings, coronations, or simply to entertain a visiting noble. The menu was a world away from the simple pottage and bread that most people ate daily. You see roasted swans, peacocks with their feathers reattached for presentation, and huge haunches of venison. One particularly quirky tidbit is that medieval cooks were obsessed with making food look like other things. They would make entremets, which were small, edible sculptures or theatrical dishes served between courses. You might see a pie filled with live birds that fly out when you cut it open, or a sugar sculpture of a knight jousting a dragon. It was the medieval equivalent of a very elaborate Instagram-worthy meal. The entertainment at a feast was as important as the food. As you walk through the crowded hall, you see jesters, acrobats, and performers. They're a mix of local talent and traveling professionals. A troubadour strums a lute in a corner, singing a long, meandering ballad about a knight's chivalrous deeds. At another table, a jester in motley clothes juggles brightly painted balls, making a group of nobles roar with laughter. You hear a loud shout and turn to see two men engaging in a kind of wrestling match for the amusement of the crowd. Historians still argue whether the elaborate displays and exotic dishes at these feasts were a way to genuinely entertain guests or simply a way for the host to assert his dominance and power over others. Was it a party, or a power play? It seems to have been both. It was a chance to eat, drink, and be merry, but it was also a tightly controlled social ritual, a performance of authority. You stand there, a little overwhelmed by the noise and the sheer excess of it all. People are drinking from large wooden goblets, telling loud stories, and occasionally, a man will fall asleep right at the table. The air is thick with the smell of roasting meat, strong wine, and the unwashed masses, a sensory experience that is both captivating and slightly nauseating. It's a raw, vibrant, and messy display of human joy, and you can't help but be a little mesmerized by it all. The memory of the rowdy, chaotic feast fades behind you as you step out of the Lord's manor and back into the cool night air. The sounds of revelry are still audible, but now they are joined by the gentle, melodic strains of a lute. A small crowd has gathered in a cobblestone courtyard, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of a lantern. In their midst stands a man with a well-worn instrument slung over his shoulder. His voice a rich, resonant baritone. This, you realize, is a minstrel. A mainstream historical fact is that minstrels and troubadours were the pop stars and storytellers of the medieval world. They were professional entertainers who traveled from town to town, bringing news, songs, and stories with them. They were a vital link in an age without widespread literacy, carrying with them the latest gossip, the newest ballads, and epic tales of knights and heroes. A minstrel might sing of a great battle, a knight's noble deeds, or a tale of forbidden love. The crowd listens with rapt attention, their mouths ajar as the story unfolds. This was their escape from the mundane reality of their daily lives. The minstrel's arrival was an event, a chance to hear something new and exciting. A quirky tidbit is that the words minstrel and troubadour actually refer to different things. Troubadours, who were more common in the south of France, were often noblemen or high-class poets who wrote and performed their own love songs and lyrical poetry. Minstrels, on the other hand, were often lower class, professional entertainers who might perform a wider range of things, from singing songs to juggling and telling jokes. They would also sometimes act as a one-man news service, singing about major events like a plague outbreak or a new tax being imposed. The most famous troubadours and minstrels were often invited to perform in the halls of lords and kings. But even the humblest performer could earn a few coins from a grateful crowd in a village square. You stand and watch, captivated. The singer's voice weaves a tapestry of sound, and you can see in the faces of the crowd that they are completely lost in the story. This was a form of entertainment that required a different kind of participation. It wasn't about watching a spectacle, it was about listening, about using your imagination to fill in the details. Historians still argue whether the popularity of these performers was due to their artistic skill or simply the hunger for news and stories in a time of limited communication. Was it the quality of the art or the scarcity of information that made them so beloved? It was likely a combination of both. The traveling minstrel was a vessel of both entertainment and information, a wandering conduit for the collective imagination of a people. The last notes of the minstrel's song fade into the night, leaving a quiet, almost meditative stillness in the air. You wander away from the listening crowd, drawn by a soft light emanating from a building with a large, inviting door. The air around it smells sweet and clean, a stark contrast to the general musk of the medieval street. You step inside, and a wave of warm, humid air envelops you. You're in a bathhouse. For people in the Middle Ages, bathing was not just about hygiene, it was a major social event, a form of entertainment and relaxation. A well-known historical fact is that public bathhouses, or stews, were popular throughout Europe, especially in urban centers. They were often privately run and offered a variety of services, from hot baths to massages and even food and drink. Far from the popular image of the unwashed Middle Ages, many towns had these establishments, and people from all social classes would visit them. A trip to the bathhouse was a chance to escape the cold of your home, to get clean, and, perhaps most importantly, to socialize. Men and women would often bathe together, though sometimes in separate areas or at different times of the day. Depending on the establishment, this casual mingling was a form of entertainment in itself. It was the medieval equivalent of a spa day, a relaxed, communal gathering. A quirky tidbit about these bathhouses is that they sometimes had a dubious reputation, since they were places where people of all classes and genders could meet in a relaxed setting. They were often associated with prostitution and licentious behavior. The word stew itself eventually became a slang term for a brothel. Historians still argue whether the decline of the public bathhouse was due to moral objections from the church or simply changing social habits and hygiene practices. Especially after the Black Death, did the authorities shut them down because of their reputation? Or did they fall out of fashion as people became more germ-aware and more isolated? It's a fascinating and debated point, but for a moment, you can just see the appeal. You watch as a group of merchants sits in a hot tub, their faces flushed, talking business. A woman gets a foot massage in a corner, and the air is filled with a low, contented murmur. It's a peaceful scene, a quiet kind of fun that is completely different from the boisterous feasts and the violent tournaments. It's a reminder that even in a world of hardship, people sought out simple pleasures. It's a moment of calm, a little slice of tranquility in a chaotic world. The soothing warmth of the bathhouse begins to fade from your skin as you step back into the cool night. You walk down a different path now, leaving the village center behind and heading towards an open meadow on the edge of the woods. The air is still, but you hear the soft rustle of feathers and a low, musical jingle. You see a figure on a horse, its silhouette sharp against the moonlit sky. Perched on their gloved arm is a magnificent bird of prey, a falcon with a leather hood covering its head. This, you realize, is a master of hawking, or falconry, and it's a prime example of a medieval sport that was both a practical pursuit and a high-status form of entertainment. A well-known historical fact is that falconry was a favorite pastime of the nobility, and it was a status symbol of the highest order. The practice of training a wild bird to hunt and return to your fist was a time-consuming and expensive endeavor, and it required a great deal of skill and patience. A noble's position was often reflected in the type of bird he or she was allowed to own. For example, a king might have a majestic gerfalcon, a powerful and highly valued bird, while a knight might have a peregrine falcon. A yeoman might be limited to a smaller bird, like a goshawk. It was a kind of living, breathing rank system, a subtle way to show off your place in the world without having to say a word. A quirky tidbit is that the birds were so highly valued that they were sometimes used as currency. A well-trained falcon could be worth more than a servant or even a small piece of land. People would also use specific terminology to describe the birds that you can still hear today, such as haggard for a wild-caught adult bird, or to jess, a bird, which means to attach a leather strap to its leg. The training process itself was an art form. The falconer had to develop a close, almost telepathic bond with the bird, a relationship built on trust and a shared goal. Historians still argue whether the thrill of hawking came from the actual hunt and the skill involved in it, or if it was more about the display of wealth and power that came with owning such an impressive and valuable animal. Was the sport the point? Or was the status the point? You stand there, a little bit in awe. The falconer gently lifts the hood from the bird's head, and its sharp, intelligent eyes blink open. The bird is released, and it soars silently into the night sky, a living weapon of breathtaking grace and speed. You watch as it circles, a dark shadow against the moon, before diving silently toward a distant field. A blur of motion, the falconer lets out a soft whistle, and the bird, with a kill in its talons, returns obediently to his arm. It's a sport that's both beautiful and brutal, a perfect reflection of the medieval world itself. You're back in the town square, the memory of the graceful falcon still fresh in your mind, when a new sound begins to build. It starts as a low murmur, then grows into a thundering roar, a collective shout of 1,000 voices. You see a large, unruly crowd surging down a narrow street, pushing and shoving their way toward a wide open field on the edge of the village. This, you realize, is the start of a medieval football match, and it's a far cry from the organized sport you know today. This isn't a game, it's a battle. A well-known historical fact is that early forms of football were wildly popular throughout medieval Europe. But they were incredibly violent and had very few rules. The field could be the entire village, with the goals being 2 landmarks a mile apart. The ball, often an inflated pig's bladder, would be at the center of a chaotic scrum, and the objective was to move it by any means necessary toward the opponent's goal. There were no limits on the number of players, and entire towns or even multiple villages would compete against each other. The result was often a brutal free-for-all, with broken bones and serious injuries being a common outcome. The games were so dangerous that they were frequently banned by kings and city officials. But the bans were largely ignored, a testament to the game's popularity. A quirky tidbit about these games is that the rules were often just local traditions. One village might allow you to kick, punch, and bite, while another might forbid the use of your hands. But in general, the games were defined by their lack of rules, not by them. The game would continue for hours, sometimes even days, only ending when a team finally managed to get the ball to the goal. You can see the pure, unadulterated joy on the faces of the players, a mix of adrenaline and fierce local pride. It was a kind of controlled chaos, a way for people to blow off steam and express their competitive spirit. Historians still argue whether the extreme violence of these games was a deliberate form of entertainment or simply a reflection of the brutal nature of the society in which they were played. Was it a sport, or a sublimation of their violent tendencies? It seems it was probably both. You stand there, a little overwhelmed by the sheer size and intensity of the mob. You can hear the shouts, the grunts of exertion, and the sickening thud of bodies colliding. It's a raw, visceral display of human energy. A reminder that for many, fun wasn't a relaxing pursuit, it was a physical, aggressive release. It was a game you probably wouldn't survive. But for a moment, you can feel the rush of being a part of it. The chaotic energy of the football game recedes as you make your way back toward the town. You're bruised and a little disheveled from being in the midst of the pushing, shoving mob. As you get closer, you see a familiar sight, a great field, with long barriers running down the center. You recognize it from before, but this time, it's not for a chaotic melee. This time, it's for a jousting tournament, and it is the single most glamorous and celebrated sporting event of the medieval world. A mainstream historical fact is that jousting was a highly formalized and ritualized sport that emerged from the chaotic melees you saw earlier. It involved 2 knights on horseback, armed with long lances, charging at each other from opposite ends of a list, or field, with the goal of breaking their lance on the opponent's shield or armor. Or, even better, unhorsing them completely. The rules were strict, the armor was incredibly heavy, and the danger was immense. A good jouster could become a celebrity, winning immense prizes and gaining the attention of kings and queens. The most famous jousters, like Sir William Marshall, were celebrated throughout Europe. A quirky tidbit is that the lances used in jousting were often designed to shatter on impact. Not just to show that a good hit was made, but also to prevent the force from being transmitted too directly to the rider, which could be fatal. The lances were also often tipped with a coronel, a blunt, 3-pronged head, to reduce the chance of serious injury. But of course, a knight could still be killed. The armor was designed to protect you from the lance, but the sheer force of the collision was still a dangerous thing to endure. The tournaments were a spectacle of pageantry and chivalry. Knights would ride in with their banners, their shields decorated with their coat of arms, and their armor polished to a gleaming shine. Ladies would watch from decorated stands, often throwing flowers or ribbons to their favorite champions. Historians still argue whether the pageantry and the rules were a way to glorify and tame the inherent violence of knightly combat, or if they were just a new form of entertainment that had nothing to do with real warfare. Was jousting a form of military training, or was it a form of performance? It seems to have been both. It was a chance for a knight to show off his skill in a controlled environment, to win honor and prizes, and to be a hero for a day. You stand there, a little bit in awe of the spectacle. The sound of the horses charging, the thundering gallop that shakes the very ground, the crack of the lances shattering, and the roar of the crowd. It is all a symphony of medieval power and glory. You can see the excitement on people's faces, the way they lean in, their breath held in anticipation. It's a reminder that even a dangerous, high-stakes game could be a form of thrilling entertainment. The roar of the jousting crowd fades as you find yourself in a different kind of gathering, one with a more sinister undercurrent. You are on the outskirts of the village, where a large circle of onlookers has formed, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and grim excitement. In the center of the ring, a large, chained bear is struggling against its restraints, a pack of snarling dogs circling it cautiously. This, you realize, is a bear baiting event, a brutal but incredibly popular spectator sport in the Middle Ages. A well-known historical fact is that animal baiting, which included bears, bulls, and even badgers, was a common form of entertainment, particularly in urban areas. Bear baiting was the most celebrated of these spectacles. A bear, often with its teeth and claws dulled, would be chained to a stake, and a pack of dogs, specially bred and trained for the task, would be released to attack it. Bets were placed on which dog would last the longest, or which bear would defeat the most dogs. It was a raw, violent spectacle that captivated audiences. But, of course, the bear almost never won. A quirky tidbit is that bears for these events were often kept and trained by professional bear wardens, who would travel from town to town, putting on shows for a fee. The most famous bears even had names, and their reputations preceded them, drawing large crowds wherever they went. A good bear baiting event was a major public draw, bringing people from all over the countryside. Historians still argue whether the popularity of these spectacles was a reflection of the general brutality of the age or if it was simply a form of escapism, a way for people to watch a battle between man-trained beasts that was far removed from their own reality. Was the attraction the violence, or the thrill of the bet and the spectacle? You stand there, a little horrified, but you can't look away. The crowd cheers and jeers as a dog, emboldened, rushes in, only to be swatted away by the massive paw of the bear. The bear roars, a deep, guttural sound of frustration and pain, and the crowd loves it. This was an entertainment that required you to suspend all modern notions of animal welfare. It was a kind of brutal ballet of predator and prey, a testament to the fact that for many, fun came from the clash of powerful forces. No matter how cruel, the unsettling spectacle of the bear baiting fades behind you as you are drawn toward a new kind of chaos. A joyous, uncontrolled energy that has completely taken over the town square. People are dancing in the streets. Musicians are playing lively tunes. And the air is filled with the scent of roasted food and a wild sense of freedom. This, you realize, is a carnival. And it is one of the most important and most beloved forms of entertainment in the Middle Ages. A well-known historical fact is that Carnival, which took place in the days leading up to Lent, was a period of wild celebration and misrule. It was a time when the normal social order was turned upside down. The rich and the powerful would mix with the poor and the weak, and the normal rules of society would be temporarily suspended. You see people wearing bizarre costumes and masks, their identities hidden, which allowed them to act in ways they normally wouldn't dare. The biggest highlight was often the Feast of Fools, where the lowest-ranking members of the clergy would take over the church and mock their superiors. It was a chaotic, irreverent, and incredibly popular way to blow off steam before the long, somber period of Lent began. A quirky tidbit is that the word carnival itself is thought to come from the Latin carne which means farewell to meat. It was the last chance to eat, drink, and be merry before the solemn fasting of Lent began. People would gorge themselves on meat, pastries, and alcohol, knowing that they would have to abstain for the next 40 days. The festivities were a powerful and important release valve for a society with a lot of rigid social rules. It was a moment of anarchy, a brief, beautiful period of sanctioned chaos. Historians still argue whether the Church tolerated these festivals as a necessary release for the masses or if they were seen as a genuine threat to social order. Was it a safe outlet for rebellion, or a genuine expression of defiance? It was likely both, a controlled rebellion that allowed people to temporarily subvert the rules without changing them permanently. You stand there, a little overwhelmed by the sensory overload, the sound of laughter, the smell of sweet pastries, the sight of people dancing wildly in the streets. It is a powerful reminder that people will always find a way to celebrate and to create their own kind of joy. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated fun, a beautiful and messy display of humanity at its most uninhibited. The vibrant, anarchic energy of carnival fades into a quiet, contented hum. The street is empty now. The wild dancing and loud music replaced by the soft glow of a few remaining lanterns. You find yourself sitting on a stone bench, the chill of the night settling in. You are alone, but not quite. You can hear a low murmur from a nearby house, the soft tones of a person speaking, and another person listening intently. This, you realize, is the final, and perhaps most common, form of medieval entertainment, the simple act of storytelling. A well-known historical fact is that in an era before mass media and widespread literacy, oral storytelling was a vital part of daily life. Families would gather around a hearth, and someone would tell a story. It could be an old folk tale, a chivalrous romance, or a simple ghost story to pass the time. It was a way to share knowledge, to entertain, and to pass on cultural traditions from one generation to the next. The best storytellers were revered, their skills a source of pride for their families and communities. The stories were often not short, they were long, epic tales that would be told over multiple nights, drawing out the suspense and keeping everyone captivated. A quirky tidbit is that these stories often weren't just for fun, they were also a way to teach lessons about morality and social behavior. The tales were filled with heroes and villains, with clear lessons about what was right and wrong. And of course, there were the riddles. A good riddle was a form of entertainment and a test of wit. People would spend hours trying to figure out the answer to a tricky riddle, and the satisfaction of solving it was its own reward. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of these stories was to entertain or to educate. Was it a form of fun, or a form of social control? It was likely both, a way to gently guide people toward a certain way of thinking while also providing a sense of community and a shared cultural experience. The stories and riddles of the Middle Ages were a quiet, intimate kind of fun. They didn't require a lot of money or a lot of spectacle. All they required was a voice and an imagination. You sit there, listening to the muffled voices from the house, and you can almost hear the story unfolding. The words painting pictures in your mind. The air is still, the world is quiet, and for a moment, you can feel a connection to all the people who have ever sat around a fire in the dark and been captivated by a story. It's a simple, universal pleasure that connects us across the ages. You've walked through a world of brutal sports, body plays, and wild festivals. You've seen the way people found joy in the mundane and the magnificent, the cruel and the kind. The world of medieval entertainment was a strange and often dangerous one, but it was also a deeply human one. They sought out fun in a world that was often hard and unforgiving, and they found it in every corner of their lives, from the battlefield to the bathhouse. Now, the final embers of the fire are fading, the last voices are hushed, the noise of the day is gone, and a deep quiet has settled over the world. Your journey is over, the stories have been told, the air is cool and soft on your skin, your eyes are getting heavy, the day's chaos is a distant memory, and all that's left is the gentle hum of the fan, the soft rhythm of your breathing, and the deepening quiet of the night. It's time to rest now. Let the sounds and images of this strange world drift away. Let your mind become as still as the night outside. The journey is over. You're home now. It's time to sleep.